Hi, everyone, and welcome to the live event on making sustainability number one in the US live music industry. We are incredibly happy to welcome our panel of speakers to share their experience and insight on creating a demand for sustainability, and especially now during a time when many of us are looking at how to put together events in a safe and healthy manner. And we are at our 1 year anniversary of the pandemic. And what it's really shown us is that we live in a very delicate ecosystem. And this is the time to think about how we come out at the end of this and be better. Can we make our live events more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable? So today we have our impressive panel to tackle this big topic. I'll quickly give introductions first and then have each person share more about their work. We have Viviane Belzaguy from Ascendance Sustainable Events, Kyle Casey from Gravity Productions, Jesse Gibson from the Burning Man Project, Eli Goldstein, who is part of the e-funk duo Soul Clap and DJs for Climate Action. And finally, we have Mikey Strauhal from the Department of Consciousness. So to kick us off introductions, let's go to Viviane first.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am Viviane Belzaguy. As Jocelyn mentioned, I'm the founder of Ascendance Sustainable Events and also soon to come Ascendance Sustainability Group. We are expanding out of the just events world into the just more general sustainability consulting world. But live music events are our jam and we miss it so much. And that is truly what we're passionate about, using live music to push the message of sustainability, get people engaged in sustainability initiatives, and take better care of our planet. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to y'all about it.
Great. Next up, we have Kyle.
My name is Kyle Casey. I am the owner and operator of Gravity Productions. I worked at AEG Presents for 11 years and left in 2018 as a still often co-collaborator with AEG Bowery and Golden Voice, specifically because I wanted to start working on events that I felt like had a more important function in our society from sustainability and social efforts impact the side of life, as opposed to just the events themselves, which of course are amazing, but we can do so much more. I was the festival director for a show in New York called Panorama NYC for 3 years. In 2019, I was the festival director for Porter Robin's Second Sky and a hip hop festival called Day in Vegas in Las Vegas, which is the largest hip hop event in history. I've worked on Coachella since 2011, and I'm very excited to be part of this panel and to hopefully be part of the change coming to our industry.
Thanks, Kyle. Next up, Jesse.
Hey, everyone. Really grateful to have the opportunity to speak here with the rest of all these distinguished panelists. I'm probably the most novice in terms of all sustainability initiatives of everyone here, but recently I've gotten involved with Burning Man as a volunteer. I am helping them conduct their first greenhouse gas emissions inventory as part of their larger 2030 sustainability roadmap, which is targeting reducing their overall carbon footprint to zero and actually going fully carbon negative by 2030. And so to do that, we're conducting a baseline estimate and then using that to kind of base all of our future reductions against that baseline that we're coming up with. And another volunteer effort that I'm also involved with is the new BLAST certification, very similar to kind of LEED would be for building certifications. And that's all volunteer driven. It's an effort for theme camps within Burning Man to take the initiative to reduce their own footprints and over time kind of get it so more, kind of like with the moot map, make it so more and more camps are really taking the initiative to reduce their emissions and to do all things sustainable. It's not just related to the emissions; it's also waste streams and just in general reducing consumption. And so we're coming up with a certification program for that, and we hope to release that pretty shortly. So that's my little bit, and yeah, I'm really excited to talk with y'all more about it.
Great, thanks, Jesse, and we look forward to hearing more about it in this event. Next up, we have Eli.
Hey, everybody. My name's Eli. I'm one half of DJ and production duo Soul Clap. Been touring around for over a decade now. And from my travels, I realized how much of an impact that we were having as a dance music industry on the planet, on climate, on emissions, on the environment of festival sites. And I got involved with an organization founded by a friend of mine called DJs for Climate Action, founded by Sam Posner, Sammy Bananas, which started out as an initiative for DJs to offset our carbon emissions from flying. But we quickly realized that just offsetting emissions is really complicated and only is a small piece of the picture. So we've been working for the last 5 years on building initiatives to educate and get artists participating and using our platforms to then get our communities involved and see what impact we can have in the industry and beyond the industry. So all that climate activism got me really interested, much more interested in what I could do and how I could, I guess, become a better climate activist. And with the whole industry basically getting canceled for almost a year now, I had the opportunity to go to graduate school, and I'm currently getting my master's in climate science and policy at Bard Center for Environmental Policy, Bard College in upstate New York. And I'm excited to continue on this path of trying to make an impact with music.
Great, thanks for sharing, Eli. So to kick off today's conversation, I want to start off by talking about some big picture thinking on why we should think about sustainability first as we click the reset button for events post-pandemic. Oh, I forgot, last but not least, Mikey, aka Captain Planet. Sorry, Mikey.
It's all good, Jocelyn. Hi, everyone. I'm Mikey Strauhal. I'm one of the environmental consultants with Department of Consciousness, D.O.C. I work with my wife, Carla Strauhal, up and down the Americas with events, specifically focusing on music festivals and dealing with material management. I'm currently working with a pollution prevention company called PPRC, Pollution Prevention Resource Center, which is a nonprofit out of Seattle, and trying to focus on the impacts of companies and reduction of resources and waste, and also currently looking for master's programs in sustainability and pollution prevention.
Great, thank you. And so with that, I would like to start off this conversation with some big picture thinking about how we should be putting sustainability first as we go ahead and click the reset buttons for events post-pandemic. Sustainability or environmental stewardship, those are often the items that get crossed off first when there are budget constraints or competing priorities. But in reality, it's not really a standalone practice, right? It's something that can be integrated into many different operations and management. And to kind of talk through this point a bit more, Vivian, you've done tremendous work in creating and leading sustainability programs. And I would love to get your insight on, how do you make the business case for sustainability? And what are the major challenges, especially during this time?
Absolutely, Jocelyn. So yeah, of course we get it, right? We get it more than anybody that, the industry is suffering and is having a hard time coming back. And when it does come back, it's going to, be a challenge, and not only challenges sustainability wise, but also challenges obviously to meet health and safety standards that are new. I mean, it's going to be a whole revolution of the way we host events, right? But what we're focusing on specifically is how sustainability can actually save money or make money. A lot of us know, but some of us don't, kind of register this, that long-term sustainability initiatives can actually save a lot of money. And even in the short term, there's things that you can do like reusable cup programs or sustainable merchandise that can actually be revenue generating opportunities. So that, of course, is what we're focusing on first. We understand that our event producers are really going to try to be doing this at the lowest cost possible. And so we can, really just focus on those. And for me, it's always about making progress, right? We don't have to try to be a perfect, fully sustainable event from year one. As long as we're still making strides in the right direction, even if it's just those strides that make sense for the bottom line, that's okay. And it's at least a start.
Great, thanks for that. And you did bring up great points. How do you better showcase initiatives by the money it saves? That's often the first go-to strategy when you talk about sustainability. People love to talk about waste reduction or energy efficiency, right? Because these translates into dollars that kind of gets put back into the projects and the events in the long run. And Kyle, I would also like to kind of get your 2 cents on this as well for this bigger picture challenges that we've been seeing.
Sure. So I have a lot of experience in more of, I guess, like the corporate side of music festivals, as well as in some of the smaller things. So from my perspective, looking at the challenge we face coming out of this is how do we make, from a consumer perspective, the sustainability a key driver of ticket sales, or a key driver of impact. There's going to be so much competition amongst in our industry for eyeballs, for tickets, because there's going to be a lot of events that are going to be all on top of each other. Everyone's kind of been sitting on the sidelines for quite a while now with no revenue. Everybody's going to be fighting for the lives of their events in order to get back into the swing of things. There are going to be some events that unfortunately aren't going to survive. How do we utilize the passion that so many of our fans and so many of us have to create a more sustainable now and a more sustainable future for our industry? I think if we can tap into that passion of the fan base, sort of as Jesse was kind of referencing when he was talking about Bernie Man camps making themselves sustainable. How do we go and really tap into those folks, into our patrons, and make that part of the lifebloods, the part of our the central focus of the future of what it is that we're trying to do? I think that will be crucial in part of telling the story of what makes the communities of these events so crucial and important for everyone that is a stakeholder as part of it. So I foresee the people who are funding these events. Everybody wants to be able to get back and have a next year and have an opportunity to have an event in 2023 or 2024 where they're able to improve upon their standards. But how do we push the public consciousness to do better now? And that can only happen, I believe, if the ticket buyers demand it.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a really great point you brought up, especially about engagement and which parties do you engage. Obviously, there are many different stakeholders here at play when you're putting together an event. There are the artists, there are the audience, the organizers, suppliers, and sustainability really has to come from everyone, and especially making that a priority across the board. I know many of you guys have, a lot of experience in pushing this topic forward, and kind of going back to the question on making the business case. Mikey, you've done significant work when it comes to waste management and how do you manage waste streams at these large events. And what we've already witnessed during COVID is that there are now massive amounts of waste everywhere, right? There are more individually wrapped items. There's PPE that's kind of going all over the place. And what I'm also a bit worried about is, how do you break that habit of being more wasteful, and this habit being created during COVID? And as we resume back to events in the future, how do we get people to still go back to being less wasteful and not contaminating waste streams?
Yeah, I mean, with COVID coming in, and once we get to the point to where events are able to come back to have gatherings of over 100 people, over 2,000 people, hopefully 50,000 plus people, you're gonna have a huge influx of single-use items. And even before COVID, at least from my standpoint and people that I've worked with, we've always tried to push education as a major priority, with being able to explain to the public as well as staff and companies that you're working with, vendors, that reducing that really reduces the workload, which can save a lot of money for an event. And I think with moving into COVID, you're even getting over the logistical nightmare of working with that. You're going to have a huge influx of PPE, personal protection equipment. And I think a major focus is going to be trying to see ways that you can find reusable items within that. And, reality, I think, is going to be, there's certain things that you're not going to be able to get away with. You're going to have a huge issue with packaging. You're going to have a huge issue with certain items that have to be single use just for health and safety. But since we have downtime right now, I think looking at the way that an event is organized and thinking about these issues, that if you're looking at the entire event as a whole and reevaluating how you're organizing that, that's going to be a major issue, and really pushing out education to your public to explain to them aspects that you're asking them to participate in, and empower them to follow along with the ethos of the event that you're putting on.
Great, good points. Especially about education. That's a whole other topic that we will definitely talk more into, about education, engagement. And before we move on from this question, I wanted to see if Eli or Jesse, do you guys have any thoughts with the work that you've been doing, either during this COVID or what you've been kind of witnessing as we all talk about going forward with events later?
Yeah, well, I think I bring a different perspective than some of the other panelists here, because, like I said, I'm working primarily as a volunteer on these efforts, right? And Burning Man does an amazing job involving their community. I mean, participation is one of our core values. And so with that BLAST certification, the Green Theme Camp certification, I mean, that is a no-cost effort to Burning Man, and still contributes to their goals of 2030 carbon neutrality, or negative carbon. And so, I think as much as possible, trying to instill culture and shifting the responsibility from the event producers to the event attendees is something that can be done through education and engagement. And also just, really asking, a lot of times I think event producers don't ask their participants or their attendees to engage in that way, that because the responsibility is conventionally thought of as theirs and not ours. We're all taking in this event, right? So as much as possible, just shifting that and doing that in a way that's inviting, not necessarily abdicating the responsibility, but really just opening it up, right? So I can talk more about specifics later on about how we think that this certification will really push the envelope and still be able to make progress in the arena of sustainability without compromising Burning Man's ability to make a return as soon and as safely as possible. So.
Thanks, Jesse. And it would actually be really interesting to learn more about the certification. With certifications, it's incredibly powerful because you're standardizing how people operate. You are creating a methodology for people to get recognition. I mean, when LEED buildings just started out, it was also just a mere certification, and now it's written into regulations. LEED being the energy and environmental design standards for most new construction now across the world. So there's a lot of power in certifications. We have this really interesting question coming in from the audience, and I think it does fit quite well with this question as we're talking about like the big picture moving drivers when it comes to sustainability in the live music industry. And that one is about, are we thinking about perhaps the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? I think across many different industries, people often point to the SDGs as here are our main topics that we want to make sure we address when we put together events or when we put together our sustainability strategy for the long term. Have any of you in your own experience in putting together and running, managing events ever referred to the SDGs as it kind of fits into sustainability initiatives?
Hey, sure, I'll answer that. So yes, I've definitely looked at the Sustainable Development Goals and used them as, kind of a guide. I think that overall, there's so many of them that apply, but overall events just have the ability to, just really drive any message, right? Like when you have this big crowd of people, if there's one in particular that you're really passionate about, then that's our platform to drive it home. But in looking at the SDGs, I mean, number 11 is sustainable cities and communities. Number 13 is climate action. Number 14 is life below water. Number 15 is life on land. There's even reduced inequalities. I mean, all of these things can be incorporated into any event's sustainability campaign. So I think it really just gives us a lot of great ideas to start with and messages to push.
I'd love to build off that one as well. I do think, in my experience, Amsterdam Dance Event has ADE Green speaking there, speaking to a lot of people there, speaking to people on the European side. I think there's a lot more discussion about the sustainability goals and how we can integrate that with our industry. I think in the US, generally, UN initiatives are not paid attention to. So that's something to think about, is how we can maybe connect a little bit deeper with what's going on in the rest of the world event-wise. I mean, I was going to bring up for the first question, I see in Europe, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the UK, there's a lot of initiatives and a lot of festivals that are making these commitments to be circular festivals, to have zero waste, to be recycling, all the waste they're producing, to be using renewable energies. And I just don't see that here in the US on the same level. We're at a very different scale here, and I understand there's a number of different obstacles that we deal with here, but it's also something that I think we're not really meeting head on enough here in the US. I mean, we did see Live Nation, I guess almost 2 years ago now, announced their zero single-use plastics initiative. I wonder if they're going to be continuing that after. But, I'd love to see more kind of corporate responsibility from the bigger companies here in the US. And I think part of that also could be related to legislation and interfacing better with local governments. That's something that's happening more in Europe. But I also think that, something that wasn't mentioned in the first question either, I think, is that it's not just about the audience. It's not just about the promoters. It's also about the artists and the managers. And that's something I really like to talk about a lot. Like, we are a community. Dance music comes from this idealistic place. And therefore, it should be our responsibility of all of us to come together and meet these goals head on, rather than kind of overlook them. I mean, when you see the fossil fuel industry maybe taking getting ahead of the music industry in sustainability in some ways, it can feel really like we're falling behind. And I think it's time with this moment now to really reevaluate. And yes, obviously it's a really hard time, with no revenue for the last year, but it gives us an opportunity to step back and figure out how we can all make an impact.
To add on top of that, just to Eli's point, I think that the legislation in Europe and the organizers, everyone's done a much better job in Europe about finding ways to make their events more circular and more sustainable in general. There's no question about it. I hope as an American that with a new administration on the federal level, we're going to be able to have some more assistance from the government. And certainly, there shouldn't be an excuse on the federal level versus on the local level. For instance, working in New York, there was no citywide compost program that existed in the city of New York until, I believe, 2017. So running events in New York prior to 2017, we had to go out and figure out a way to compost food waste, and to do it, with a local CSA, or to do it with, private organizations, as opposed to being able to go to the city. Now, the city has been able to create a compost initiative, but it's still in its infant stages. And those are the kinds of things that we, and I think this is where the community that Eli's talking about, that exists amongst all of us that are part of these events, the ability to get organized and to have these conversations, we do need to be able to go out and have these conversations with brands, with our local municipalities that rely on a lot of the revenue that we bring from a tourist level to all of the events from tax purposes, and say that this is something that we all want and that we're looking for. And I hope that is an area that we can push together. And I'm actually part of an organization that started during the pandemic that we're calling the Fellowship of Festival Leaders. And that's a US-based organization with people who are running events all over the country. We're in the infant stages now, but we're focusing specifically on equity. And that's something that I think when we look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, one element that you see that hits almost all of those goals is the idea of equity that exists amongst all of the different checkpoints, the different stakeholders that happen in each of these things, whether it is the environment, the people that are working at the event, people that are affected by the events. And that's something that I can talk about a little bit later, perhaps, but I think we do need to come together as a community and be pushing for equity.
Great, thanks for sharing. And you guys do bring up good points. We are at this point where there are boots on the ground, coalitions, conversations, interests in calling for more stringent standards from, let's say, the federal government, or even from cities, right? At the moment, a lot of these practices are being run by the cities, and the cities are dictating how citizens should be running their businesses and initiatives. For example, New York City, about, I think, 2 years ago now, they've made very ambitious legislation specifically talking about reducing carbon emissions across the board, about giving more funding into supporting the infrastructure locally. And that's really just set off this chain of conversation and interest within this city. And now many more businesses are talking about it. And actually, Kyle, I think we should talk about this equity piece more and more. What we've noticed in last year, 2020 was not just a year living with the pandemic. It was also a year with many, many demonstrations on racial injustice and inequity, especially in the US, right? The communities that are affected by COVID are the same communities that are underserved, and also the same ones that are facing this inequity. So, how are other organizers kind of thinking about this social issue that is kind of prevailing in our local communities? And overall, it's clearly a very large issue to address and to tackle, but companies must have a responsibility in addressing this core issue at hand. I'm wondering, does anyone here have any thoughts to share about that? How do we, as organizers and producers and suppliers, push ourselves to be more responsible for these types of social issues?
I'm happy to run with that one. I think, it goes back to this idea of community, right? And I mean, I think we've seen all too much over the last decade or so, live music, electronic music, dance music festivals get more and more expensive to go to events, and the audience being more and more affluent, because that's just the reality of who can afford to buy tickets. So, going back to this idea of having this moment now to be rethinking things, beyond just the sustainable piece of it, it's also thinking about how we can think of alternative business models for how we're building these festivals, how we're building the record labels, how we as artists are being paid, how, everybody's being paid. Why is the security staff making minimum wage, but there's a DJ making $50,000 that night? This is just like coming from this point about idealism and dance music, and growing up a raver. I feel like it's like it doesn't go hand in hand, right? So we have to think about how we can look beyond the current business models and build equity into the actual events. And also, I mean, take the lead as artists, right? And I have seen, because so many of us have not been able to be on the road, a lot of artists taking steps forward in activism in all areas. And I think, like with climate, at this point, we see that, climate change basically is we need to be addressing climate justice, because climate change affects the same people who are affected more by COVID, affects communities around the world that are the ones who already don't have access to the things that we have. So I think we have to really be looking at that climate justice model in everything we do.
So, if I may, one thing I'd like to just make sure that, well, I think all of us are involved in events. I imagine a lot of people that are watching this live right now are also involved in events. We all know how difficult it is to not only put these events on, with all of the different pieces that go into the development of them, but then also to make money off of an event that may only take place 1, 2, 3 days out of an entire year, right? The brands that we're creating are fleeting. They exist only in a moment of time. It's different than even an artist that's going out on tour, traveling from city to city, where they can share their message, each night with a different audience in a different town. Our events, as we specifically talk about festivals, or any other one-off events, the goal is to make it a year-over-year success so that it can continue to come back. I think that, just going back to the point that I had brought up earlier, engaging our community on a year-round basis and talking about what the important goals of our events are, in the way that Burning Man is known around the world for doing so, is an important way for us to really cultivate that culture that doesn't necessarily have to exist in one time and place. In talking about the equity that I was discussing with this group called the Fellowship of Festival Leaders that I was discussing earlier, our goal is also to take a look at education. We have a 2-point plan that we're going to try to be raising money towards develop, and it's personal development for current festival leaders, many of whom are not full-time employees, and getting the kind of D&I training or support from companies who have the ability to do these sorts of things and don't have the resources or nowhere to look to get some of this help and training. And then the second side of it would be helping to develop the future of festival leaders to make our back of house look a little bit more like our front of house, and to help not just make this something where the same group of people like myself are working on 10 events a year or 20 events a year, but rather continuing to reach out to our community and bring those the next generation of leadership in.
Yeah, and also definitely having an element of making a local impact too, because often a lot of our events are held in remote or rural areas, and people come in and spend money in the economy maybe a little bit, and that's a good positive impact. But that's something you also have to now kind of balance with COVID as well too, of not wanting to potentially, even if you're trying to hold an event as safely as possible in this current global context, it's still something very tenuous, right? But one thing that I saw artists do, and kind of speaking to what Eli was talking about, I mean, this is a model that's been around for a while, but I would really like to see it make a strong comeback when events do resume again, but would be like, permaculture action days in the area of the event, where the community, not just the event organizers and the artists, particularly, spearheading this, organize local impact projects that gathered folks together the days before and after the event to make a positive impact in the area that the event is held in. I think that's hugely important, and I would really like to see that be something that kind of maybe is put in front and center when events do begin resuming, is how can we really harness this energy that we as a community bring to these events, but then how does that spread outside of the festival boundaries in a way that really impacts everyone in a more equitable way. So I would like to see that as something that we focus on.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, Jesse, I think that there's just a huge opportunity, right, for us to get creative with our solutions. How do we solve multiple problems with one initiative, right? So can we have a volunteer program that allows for people who would not have been able to afford the festival tickets to help with a sustainability initiative and be able to attend the festival? Things like that are things that are targeting and solving multiple problems with one thing, and also educating your audience, educating your community, being more inclusive. I mean, it's a win-win, right? So I just try to think of how we're solving multiple problems each time.
And Eli actually just sent me in a private chat a reminder about a group that I've been involved with as well, called Burners Without Borders, which is a group that's been longstanding, doing work outside of the festival world. And when events first, got shut down, in March of 2020, rather than focus on kind of just resign themselves or stop really working towards change, they actually doubled down and they started doing COVID-19 response projects, where they would activating the resources that we have within the Burners Without Borders community to make PPE, for example. There was another group that was taking all the RVs that were out, not in use, and using them for housing for nurses and other types of health workers that maybe were being moved to different areas. So I really think you can have a lot of work being done by people within the event industry right now without the events actually happening. If anything, it frees up the time for us to focus on these other things that are super important. So as far as like the social justice piece, like not saying, all right, no events, no impact, right? We can still utilize our communities and the resources that we normally put towards them towards other things. I mean, I heard quite a few of my friends in Portland that were in the event space. They began activating using their audio production skills to and the technical skills to help the George Floyd protests, you know, like as far as providing audio and all these other things. So like we can take, these resources are sitting idle, right? And we can really put them to work if we just put our mind to it. And again, it really takes thinking, getting out of the mindset of it's all on the producer and more like, all right, we're a community. And I think artists pushing the, you know, really encouraging their fans to do it. I mean, it is a really powerful tool as well. So I think we don't have to think, you know, events are the only way that we can kind of utilize this human capital that we have, right? And so that's something I just wanted to throw in there.
Great. Yeah, I mean, what we're hearing over and over again is, you know, those who attend these events, there's a very strong sense of community. And we do feel this responsibility to where we are and also with the people that we meet there. And I think that's one of the very unique factors when we're talking about these larger live events. People go there for a new experience, and through that experience, we're also engaging them on how they can be better locally, how they can take these types of habits and ways of thinking back home to, you know, to share with their friends and their family. And that's very powerful. That's not something every industry has, and it's very, very unique. So I wanted to shift a little bit. So we're talking a lot about community benefits, but you know, the other side of sustainability is about data and how do we measure successes and show how we are performing, are setting our goals, because at the end of the day, what you don't measure, you can't manage. So having, you know, these indicators on how your sustainability initiatives are going, whether that is recycling rates, carbon emission reductions, miles traveled, having these numbers really give organizers like a baseline on how they're doing, and will set goals and measure success, and people can understand and grasp that a little bit better. So I would love to hear, Jesse, you have been dubbed as like a data wizard for a lot of the work that you do, especially as a volunteer for the Burning Man Project. Could you talk a bit more about why there was such an importance, why there was such an important goal in setting a carbon neutrality goal, and what were the challenges in getting that together?
Well, I can't take credit for the 2030 sustainability roadmap. That is like the super broad. Burning Man from the top down has kind of decided that that's a priority for them. So, you know, I just kind of came in. I actually commented on the way I got involved with that project was they put out a report, and I think I commented on the Google Doc of like, hey, I would really like to help out with this. So I just kind of like reached out that way, and they reached out to me and followed up, and I got involved that way. I can't speak to too much to the data that we're actually analyzing right now because the report's going to come out sometime in March or April. So I'm not going to speak to those specifics. But I mean, one of the big things that I can kind of elucidate to that I don't think would breach my NDA or anything like that, but it's no surprise that for a global event like Burning Man, most of the emissions are actually coming from travel, right? Which is not, it's not the event itself, right? People think of all the generators and the burn and all these things that like, you know, seem consumptive at the event. And I can tell you without giving hard numbers that that is a very, very small fraction of the total emissions picture. And I mean, emissions, again, is only one small way of looking at impact, right? And data. I'm sure Mikey can definitely speak to a lot more about the waste numbers as well, because I know he does an amazing job tracking that, having worked with him in a ton of events. But yeah, I just think that again, I keep coming back to the same point that we want to put a lot of the responsibility on the event producers. But when I've looked at the data, the hard data from this emissions inventory that I did for Burning Man, it's mostly the participants in coming to the event. So like thinking again, how do we shift that responsibility and without abdicating responsibility, right? We still have to do our part as organizers, but we have to kind of educate and engage folks and maybe come up with ways to encourage people to take the responsibility themselves. And that's what the certification piece is about, right? I mean, that's all data driven as well. Like, we're coming up with very hard metrics by which we can measure the impact that all of these different sustainability metrics, waste, shelter, water, food, transportation, all come together. And the goal with that, again, is to say, all right, let's reward the people that are, and not just with a nominal reward, right? I mean, Burning Man is engaging this group. And while we haven't worked out exact agreements yet, we hope to make it so the certification is tied to some type of carrot, right, as opposed to a stick, to make it so to make it so people are really self-motivated to reduce their own impacts and be able to measure that year after year, and then, you know, kind of review, are we making progress every year? So I really encourage everyone to follow the 2030 sustainability roadmap updates as they come out. We expect to put out a report pretty soon, so there'll be some really hard metrics there, and I think anyone who's a data nerd like myself will really enjoy reading it. So
Yeah, I'd love to piggyback on Jesse and saying regarding measurement that events, if they're not already thinking about it, ought to be thinking about leaving a legacy. I know that I've worked with tons of events, and especially after doing a lot more work with AGF, personally with audits, that there's a lot of events that aren't really documenting a lot of the work that they're doing, and they events. You know, they're always changing, and people are jumping from one event to the next, and so you might have someone that's amazing at their job, but they're not writing anything down. They're not documenting anything. It's all in their head. And then if they don't come back next year, it's kind of like reinventing the wheel. The person who then comes into that and is like, okay, well, what did you guys do last year? What, you know, what was going on? They're like, well, we don't know. The lead was doing this, and they're gone. And so then it's like, okay, well, now I have to take the time to like redo the entire system because I don't know what the system was exactly the previous year. And I would say that events ought to be thinking more about leaving a legacy and documenting the work that they're doing. And this goes with the entire organization of an event, and with any position, that if they are writing that down and they're able to then leave that for the next year, it's not only going to help them if they're in the same position that year moving forward, but it's going to help anyone else after that be able to work upon that system. That's going to save resources, that's going to save time and money, and that's going to allow an event to last longer and be more sustainable with that documentation. And then also from my own experience working with AGF, it definitely broadened my perspective on thinking outside of what I was just mainly focusing on, which was like material management, mostly with solid waste and recycling, but looking more into transportation and procurement. And a lot of that has to deal with the public and staff, and the vendor side is a very small portion. And yes, it's large, but when you take that and compare it to your public is so much larger than that, and their impacts are going to supersede anything that the event does because of the quantity of people that you might have going to your event. So if you're not educating your public on the initiatives that you're trying to do and then empowering them to assist you with that, you're never going to be a zero waste event. You're never going to be able to see that dramatic change, especially if it's with carbon emissions. Like Jesse was saying with Burning Man, any international event, the carbon emissions from transportation alone from participants will far outweigh or exceed anything that the event is doing in and of itself. And so events really need to look at that and really push education into the culture of their event so that they're working on building that up with the people that are going there. Because a person's going to an event because they enjoy things that the event's doing, whether it's music, art, or the culture, workshops, whatever, and you need to incorporate that into what you're doing.
I know Vivian has great answers to these too, but I'm just gonna say really quickly, there's a wild solution to this, which is a carbon tax for attendees, where you pay based on how far you have to travel. It also deals with equity. So then people who live, near an event can actually get in for very cheap, if not free. But if you have to get on an airplane, you're paying thousands of dollars to get into that event. So I mean, it's out there. Who knows? But it's something that maybe is worth thinking about how we can make that work.
Yeah, agree. I mean, I think that it's about, giving attendees and, well, first of all, education, right? Like we've all said, but giving attendees access to these tools where they can, become responsible for their own emissions. And so, a great thing that we were working on for Ultra 2020, unfortunately, when it didn't happen, this program didn't happen, but we had, for the first time, brought on a carbon calculation and offsetting partner. And so attendees were going to have access to calculating what their carbon footprint was going to be, and then offsetting it through local programs like tree plantings and also reforestation programs in the Amazon. I mean, it was going to be really, really cool. And I hope to bring something like that out in the future. But yeah, giving them the ability to understand first what their impact is and then do what they can to either avoid it or offset it is huge.
Burning Man too, in regards to that, carbon calculation, and in giving the participants tools to do it themselves. Another volunteer effort that we've been working on that's kind of tied in with all this is also making a carbon calculator specifically, again, for theme camps, not related to the certification, but making that mandatory in order to be placed, because placement, within Burning Man is very important, where your camp is positioned, right? And it's a process, right? And you have to submit and apply. So making it so we're going to have a carbon calculator. While this is nothing that Burning Man has agreed to yet, they're definitely fielding the question among volunteers that are coming up with this carbon calculator. And so making that part of the process, that's, and then year after year, those camps that keep coming back can measure their success, right? And so I think that'll be a really powerful tool in just even getting people to think about it, right? And then linking them to the certification. So, hey, it turns out that based on your calculation, you guys might actually be able to get a certification that then gets you to a fast pass to cut the line. Again, none of those things have been promised yet, but I'm really pushing for there to be a carrot associated with people who are doing a good job. But I also like Eli's idea of the stick as well, a carbon tax that could potentially address some of the social justice issues and equity, right? So people who are local can afford to go, versus the people traveling thousands of miles are subsidizing them. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I would love to see more events having a transparency on initiatives that allow participants to see whether it's already incorporated into the ticket price, or whether it's an offsetting or mitigation initiative that allows them to know, hey, we'd really like you to volunteer to put $5 or whatever that amount is into this program. This will help offset carbon emissions, or whatever it is that you're trying to reduce, and then allow the public to be able to see that, so that they understand, because it's really hard to know what your ticket price goes to, and it goes to a lot of different things, and to show at least that or something along that line would be really moving.
This was actually something that I spoke with Vivian and Jocelyn about in our pre conference call, which was this idea of transparency and allowing the public to see where the money's going from that ticket is so important. I mean, that can then also encourage artists to give a percentage of their fee. Like, look, if you don't want to talk about fee reductions for artists, managers and agents, well, give 5%, give 10% towards these sustainability initiatives or to these equity initiatives at festivals. If the artists are doing it, it's really going to encourage the attendees to do it. And it's a great way to not lower fees, but also be, putting some of this money to good uses.
Yeah, certainly. There is so much power behind transparency, because you are truly empowering people to understand where their dollars go. And having that knowledge makes people feel like they're not individuals who are helpless, and they are really pulling together this major effort in making things to be done more efficient, to be done more in a more inclusive way, for things to be done with fewer resources. And I feel like this is an often big issue when it comes to talking about climate change. People often have to ask themselves, I'm just an individual. What does my say have to do? What does my actions have to do when it comes to this global issue? And there's just so much power behind collective voices, right? We here are part of this massive community, and we show more transparency of that. That also means we're more knowledgeable in advocating for these practices that we all have been working on for so many years. So one of the questions, other questions I had kind of lined up is also about engagement. So talking about artist engagement, audience engagement, and kind of educational pieces that go with that. How do we better develop resources that make people want to jump up and do something about this? Yes, Mikey.
I just wrote into a comment for the panelists of after what Eli said of using artists' influence to engage the public on cultural ethos, and I think that events really need to utilize that in a much larger picture. A lot of people go to events because of the artists that are going to be there, and if an artist says one thing like, "Hey everyone, before I play my last closing set, if everyone can look at the ground, pick up one item and bring it to the station, we're going to dance our faces off and it's going to be great, and we'll leave the dance floor clean," right? As just like one small example. But if an artist says something, the influence that they have upon the public that's going to that event is major, and events can utilize that even on a voluntary standpoint with the artists to really build upon the cultural ethos at the event to move the participants in their mindsets when they go to that event. And not just that, but when they take something from that event, especially on an international level, they're going to go back home and they're going to have that mindset, and they're going to be jonesing on the energy from that event. And that's going to spread out and continue to grow. And I think that's an important aspect.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I mean, the as a culture, at least in the States, and I know in a lot of places in Europe as well, we are terrible about cleaning up after ourselves at events. Like look at any sporting event in Japan where you have the audience will go and clean up a stadium after an event occurs. If we were able to do that at festivals, take the 10 to 15 step walk to go put your thing after you've done eating it into a certain bin, into the correct bin, then that is going to save us as the event, which is again a community, tens of thousands of dollars that will then enable us to go use that money wisely in another direction. So I completely agree, and I do totally agree with everything that Eli's talked about with artists using their platform. I think that it's an important place to start. And for many of our events, artist fees are the ones that are, a huge part of the budget, if not the largest part of the budget, depending on what your event is.
Yeah, I love that idea of redistributing or like more transparency in where people are buying their tickets or like where their money goes when they buy tickets. And in terms of COVID and this year, I know there were a ton of outrage from people about events canceling and not necessarily being able to refund people in full. And I think, again, it's because there's no understanding on part of festival goers. They think that the money just gets spent the weekend of the event, but they don't understand the planning that goes into it leading up to it. So in terms of also just making our lives easier as event producers, right, that would be great. And also then, yeah, you can put pressure on artists to say, hey, look, you're like 50% of the budget or a huge part of the budget, right? And so thinking, hey, can we have you take a cut in order to fund sustainability pieces? I think when you put it in terms of how much of each ticket is going to the artist budget, then I think individual artists, will maybe, or at least the headliners, right, who are making an exorbitant amount of money might be willing to, yeah, all right, I'll chip in some for a low, sustainability initiative, or for a, low income ticket program or something like that. I mean, that just seems to make a lot of sense to me. I really like that point.
I would say, that's a big part of what we try to work on with DJs for Climate Action is educating artists and providing easy tools to then pass that education on to their communities. I think that's a big part of it. I think most artists, probably if you ask them, care about this stuff, but just don't have the time or or know how to get the message across to their communities, to their audiences. So if you make it easy for them, that's a really, that allows for a lot of these things to happen. So, I mean, yeah, it's kind of sad. I mean, I wish some artists would put more energy into it, but at the same time, it's not everybody's job to be the activist and figure these things out, right? A lot of people are just creative and they're artists and they have other, they have other strengths. So, but they do care. So if you give them chances, I mean, like there's a great initiative that started recently with Brian Eno as one of the main founders called Earth Percent, which is, allowing musicians and also all different parts of the events and music industry to contribute a percentage of revenues to music related and other sustainability initiatives. So this is something to think about. It's like artists, you give 1%, 2%, 5% of your earnings every year, because you know the impact you're making and you're committed, and then you can then share that with your community, and they're going to be that much more excited to get involved as well.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that the other day, Eli, when we were talking, because it really gives artists a skin in the game as well, right? It makes it a win-win when they're able to say, you know what, I did this so that this festival or so that this event can be more sustainable or can be more inclusive, or both, right? Like let's talk about it. Let's have the transparency out there and allow the artists and the festival to promote this stuff, because like you said, Jesse, so many people just don't understand how budget is spent behind the scenes. They don't understand how much money really goes into producing these things, and that in a lot of cases the promoters are hoping that they get to make some money the day of the event, so if we allow artists, if we talk to them, and also, like you said, Eli, talking to their managers, right, and making sure that the managers understand that this is a priority for both parties, then we're able to really talk about it as an event, as an artist, as a promoter, everybody. So I love those ideas.
One thing
I'd like to go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, just one quick thing. If people aren't familiar with the Global Citizen Festival that happens in New York by the Global Poverty Project, really interesting event. And the reason I bring it up right now is because I'm seeing a lot of comments talking about incentivization and talking about kind of gamification. I think that the model that they've created for their free event in order to give out tickets in general is pretty revolutionary in regards to an incentive-based way in order to gain a point system in order to get tickets to the event in general. It's something that I think is definitely leading the way towards a way that we could all think about how we handle our free tickets or our comp tickets as it relates to our communities. So I would encourage everybody to check out that model.
I'd like to just really quick piggyback on what Vivian said, and talking to managers and talking to the artists, that talk has to happen. If you don't talk to them, you're not going to know anything. And I would just encourage event organizers to at least ask, let alone anything else, that you at least start that conversation and see where it goes.
Thanks, everyone. So we are coming down close to the hour, and to kind of finish out this conversation, which is a very large topic. So, this one question that I want to put in everyone's mind is, we have people who are listening in who are clearly, spend their careers working on this, or who are interested in doing this, or they're attendees wanting to do more. So, what is one opportunity do you think that has a very large potential in creating this cultural shift that we keep talking about, creating this cultural understanding to know that our impacts, our actions have impacts, and that we kind of need to have this call for collaboration for all of us to address this larger issue?
So I love what Kyle said earlier about how we make sustainability a ticket sales driver. And I feel like that is actually something that happens from the ground up, right? How do we have audiences tell festival organizers that it's a ticket driver? So for me, something that I think people don't necessarily know, speaking of like things that people don't understand about behind the scenes event production, is that there's always somebody watching the social media channels, right? There's always somebody watching the emails that come in from the website. Even if you feel like they don't get answered, or you feel like they don't get addressed, or you feel like you're one person in a sea of 50,000 people that's writing these things, somebody in the office is looking at that, and it's likely their job to report on things that they start to see become a trend, right? So if there's more than one comment, more than one email that starts to come in about a specific topic, it's something that's going to get brought up at a meeting. So really, I feel like that's something that is everybody's responsibility, in a way that everybody can have some impact, is start making comments on social media, start sending emails, start saying that this is important to me and that I really want to buy tickets to your event, but I'm not going to do it if I know that it's going to have this really horrible impact on the planet. And there's lots of ways to approach it, right? Like we can come at it from an encouraging and supportive place versus, seeming like we're complaining or bringing up things that, haven't been addressed. It can be, how can I support you in, sustainability initiatives? Here are some tips or solutions for issues that I've seen at your festival in the past. So I feel like this is really something that's so easy for everybody to do and can really make a big impact if more than one of us start making these kinds of comments and sending these emails.
Definitely trying to make sure that the volunteers or excuse me, the participants are the ones driving it. I mean, I think that that's something that Burning Man is doing an amazing job of, and we hope that that exports to other events as well. And I love that comment about just flooding the social media channels. I mean, look at these comments here. Clearly, the people in the comment section care a lot about waste, and they're making sure that we know about it. Some of them are good friends of mine, and so it's good to see them here too. But yeah, I mean, it has an influence on the discussion, right? The topic of conversation shifts a lot when the event producers perceive that that is something that's of importance. So I just wanted to really echo that. I thought that was a great point.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this idea of also artists, being able to make demands as well, in the end, it's without the performers, there's no lineups that people are going to buy tickets for either. So, artists encouraging the promoters, artists encouraging their audiences, their communities to do these as well comes to be a big part of it. And I see a great comment here about having some kind of commission or council about sustainability of festivals. I think this is something that's often missing globally, but even just on a regional basis in the US. A lot of these panels I've had the honor of speaking on have been very European centric. So it is really great to connect with some other folks here in the US. And I think, we should go out and be trying to move this conversation across the different areas of the US festival and music industry. But it is complicated, right? There's many different, kind of sizes, levels, corporateness of different events, different festivals. So, it's hard to always be taking everybody's ideas and necessities into account. But I think starting at least to have these conversations across these different areas would be really, really useful.
I've seen several artists also have writers that aren't specific to what's backstage for them or what their technical needs are. It's about, I won't play an event if you have single use. So like those big headliner level artists, if they put their foot down and make that a huge part of it, then there's nothing the event can do except for adhere to it. So they wield a ton of influence, and I think the green writers, or I can't remember which artist I remember reading about doing it.
It's Bye Plastic is the organization. It was started by Blondish, and they're doing an amazing job of getting artists to, and they have thousands of artists who have now committed to this green writer. So I mean,
such a good idea.
Like, can we keep artists super committed coming out of COVID, right? How do we make sure that there's this, hard push? Because often, it's the intern at your agency that's going to be passing that rider on to the promoter. And, often that means that the rider's ignored. So it's an important piece of it. And I guess, look, the bigger the profile the artist is doing this, the bigger impact it's going to have.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, having been on the promoter side, there have been writers that I've received from Radiohead, Jack Johnson, a variety of artists, probably dozens over the years. The bigger, as you guys are suggesting, in terms of the headliner, the better. I mean, there are sometimes when I've gone through at venues that, it's not a venue that I work at all the time, but I'm charged with making sure that they're changing out all of their halogen bulbs for LEDs and that there's no single-use plastic water bottles anywhere. And some of these venues are huge arenas and amphitheater-style venues that, listen, this is part of the deal. And the artists are saying, well, throw it in the budget. That's part of the deal. If you don't already have these pieces as part of the puzzle. Yeah, I see someone talking about Reverb in here. They've done a really amazing job over the past 15 or 20 years about trying to get that initiative started in the States. And now it's great to see that other companies like Global Inheritance and Clean Vibes and, all of your organizations that have popped up to try to make this work. So kudos. I think the good news is that there's a lot of passion for this. And I think that as we're all talking about, the more conversations that we have in the community to kind of get this working and get this done, the better off, we're all going to be. And hopefully, I think the question is, how quickly is the snowball going to roll down the hill?
Say coming back from COVID, whenever we are able to get back and events in a large scale are able to come back, I would just encourage and recommend event organizers to not put environmental or sustainability issues on the side, but really truly incorporate that into everything that you're doing, and that it is feasible, it is affordable, and what Vivian mentioned earlier in the talk is that it actually can be a moneymaker. It can bring in more ticket sales, and you can make a profit off of that while reducing your impact.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I think from this really, really engaging conversation, we all have to kind of put our heads together and let us use this time to kind of transform the way we operate, and not just, we want to be innovative as well. Let's bring innovative solutions. Let's click reset and just do better. And from what we're hearing is there are resources out there that are being developed. There are community-based groups that are addressing this and demanding change. So keep building onto this energy, right? And at some point, if we keep voicing our what we want and voicing this importance, we will eventually catch the right ear, and will really be something that we can build into the infrastructure of this entire industry. So with that said, we are at the end of our event, and time has flew by very, very quickly. So I do want to take this time to thank, of course, our wonderful panelists for sharing their experience and expertise on this. For the audience, also thank you for tuning in and making this a really fun and engagement 1 hour. If you're interested in learning more about, sustainability and live events, there is going to be an upcoming Green Events and Innovation Conference in March, and this happens to be the pre-conference panel on that. So definitely check that out if you're looking to learn more. Other than that, with everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day or evening wherever you're tuning in from. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. See you all at the conference.
Thank you.
See you there. Bye.